I recently made a Twitter post where I talked about how the last 3 years was a dry run for what's coming. For the real virus, the real killer pandemic, north of 5 to 10% fatality rate. And in this post, I was referencing a video that was showcasing the fine work of a couple officer friendlies accosting an individual for not wearing the proper business attire, ultimately using an egregious excessive use of force on this individual to get them to comply with whatever sort of bullshit rule was handed down from the top. Now, my point of making that post was to show that this was a dry run for the big one, and that if you think that that was excessive use of force, just wait until we do get a real killer virus and they put some of these individuals in hazmat suits and they give them live ammunition. You ain't seen nothing yet. Nothing. It was all just preconditioning us for the inevitable biowarfare that is going to either result from or in an attempt to thwart the progression of World War III. Wars are coming with China and Russia. There are many different possible angles in which the injection of biowarfare into the mix can potentially alleviate and minimize the prospect of things getting wildly out of control, or they could just be another chain in the escalatory ladder towards the use of nuclear weapons. Why am I so convinced that the lengths that law enforcement will go to, not all, but many, the lengths that they will go to when given the order is going to be extreme. It is going to be excessive, and it is going to catch everybody by surprise. There was a response to that post, and that's what prompted me to make this video today. But I will say, I think Hollywood has conditioned us falsely to believe that when the shit hits the fan, everybody's just going to run riot, that it's going to be anarchy in the streets. We always underestimate the will of authoritarian institutions to crack down on things. If you would have told me before the pandemic that they were going to lock everything down and completely crash the economy for the sake of saving the lives of some people they probably didn't care about much beforehand anyways. We're talking about the vets. We're talking about the geriatric population. We're talking about people in high-risk populations, people that the government didn't give two shits about before this whole thing happened. If you were going to tell me that they were going to stop society for the sake of these people, then I would have, I was completely on the opposite end. 5 years ago, I would have thought the police were going to jump ship. The government was just going to let things, I expected a little bit of quarantining and a little bit of lockdown, but nothing to the extreme that we are seeing or seen at that point in time. Now, multiply that by 10, and you are going to see what will happen if and when a real virus comes around. I cannot for the life of me comprehend why we took the approach we did for the last 3 years. There is no real rational, especially in light of the fact, and I must emphasize this point, that the people who were saved by, shutting everything down were the people that the government viewed as a burden before. I mean, whether in a fiscal sense, in terms of having to provide them with Medicare or whatever sort of other supports that they needed, as the joke went, and this is not a joke that I take lightly, because a lot of people have fell ill and died as a result of it. So not to minimize the death, but the old meme, the boomer remover, right? And the boomers are by and large relying on the pensions that they get, and so getting those out of the way is actually a net benefit to the government. So you have to ask yourself, why is this government and all of these corporations who are constantly motivated by greed, all of a sudden caring about the well-being of these individuals? Well, is it just to precondition us to the inevitable biowarfare that's about to precipitate World War III? Somebody left a comment on the channel. They said that if the fatality rate was that high, north of 10%, even north of 5%, I'm talking like a 5% across the board. If it was 5% across the board, this individual said that police would go home, they would not report for duty, everybody would be phoning in sick, no one would show up for work, and society would effectively collapse. Okay, police would not show up to work. Now, 5 years ago, I probably made a video theorizing that very thing. People would abandon their posts. People wouldn't show up in the military. Okay, there would be nobody to fight the wars. Nobody would want to go to the front line. Everybody would be AWOL. There would be more people AWOL than there was active duty to round them all up and send them to jail. There would be nobody working in the jails. That's what I would have thought. But after seeing the preconditioning, and now that everybody has been primed, now that everybody knows their roles and has been preconditioned to know what role to assume and when, and given that little bit of power that perhaps they lacked, that the enacting of war powers and emergency powers permitted them to do so, they got a taste of it. And now everybody knows the routine. Everybody knows the drill. And for that reason, I think that now, after this experience for the last 3 years, I don't believe that's going to be the case. I believe that if you have a virus with a fatality rate north of 5%, people are going to show up to work and they're going to be incentivized to do so. They're going to give them preferential treatment on every front. Because understand, a fatality rate virus north of 5%, everything shuts down. Everything shuts down. Even essential services to some extent or another. And that means food rationing. When you have to ration food, and because the majority of people are not prepared to go it alone, people are going to have no choice. You're going to be able to be given a choice. You can work for us as law enforcement. We'll give you all the protective gear you need. We'll give you a wide array of freedoms that you can utilize to neutralize whatever you perceive to be a threat. And we'll give you the means to do so, likely in the form of live ammunition. And you will be able to, because this virus is so lethal, that's going to be the thing, it's 100 times more lethal, 1,000 times more lethal, right? Because a 10% fatality rate, that's serious. That is deadly serious, even for some people who are completely cynical and jaded about the whole process by now. That is very, very dangerous. You're going to have people fighting to get jabbed. People who at one point were completely averse to the idea. People who protested against the mandates and all of this stuff. You're going to have people fighting tooth and nail for it. So these law enforcement officers are going to be given a choice. You can be the first to get fed. You can have this job. You can have personal protective equipment, and you could be the first one guaranteed to get whatever sort of medical intervention we cook up. And most people are going to do it. And the extent that they're going to go to will surprise people. You see, we've been conditioned to believe by Hollywood that the government in its various bureaucratic appendages are just going to retract back into their shells when the shit hits the fan. But what we are seeing is the complete opposite. No. When they go to war, they're going to enact martial law. There's going to be a full-scale crackdown. If there is a financial collapse looming, pending, they're just going to close the markets. If there is a biological agent running rampant through the population, they will shut everything down. This is going to be their approach. Total lockdown. And if you step out of line, then you are going to be in trouble. They will make sure that the enforcers have enough perks, enough carrots dangled in front of them to perpetuate whatever manner of atrocious crimes they see fit to keep the population under control. Now, understand, this could be a perfectly justifiable and natural occurrence of events, in that there may well be a virus that emerges from nature. No lab leaks, no biowarfare, nothing like that. And this very well could catch the government off guard, who means well, who does everything they possibly can in order to create some sort of intervention. And the intervention may even work. Okay, and they may even do their best to try to get that intervention into everybody's arm. But it is going to come at the end of a gun, ultimately. It's going to come with a little tint of tyranny in the very least, especially if there is a working vaccine. Because, with a 10% fatality rate virus, everybody's going to take that. People say, no, I'm never going to take it now. 10% is a lot. I mean, roll the dice 10 times. There's a good chance the number that you don't want to come up is going to come up. That's fair. And what that probably means is that it's going to be a very painful illness for a lot of people. A 10% fatality rate is probably like a 50% hospitalization rate. And then if you have all those people in close proximity and you have people going home, it would just be a nasty situation. We've seen what 1%, not even 1%, okay? Let's be honest. At the start, it was when you had the wild variant. But we've seen what that could do in terms of how quickly our system could be overwhelmed, in terms of bottlenecks, supply chains. Just imagine 10%. And 10% is doable. We have viruses out there that have a 50, 60% kill rate. Yes, they typically have short incubation periods. And yes, they typically tend to have people exerting overt symptoms which are easy to identify and thus quarantine those individuals. But anything is possible. We've seen 3 of these pandemic-ready variants emerge in the past 20 years. This is all new. SARS-1, SARS-2, MERS. What's next? SARS-3. Okay? You see how this is working here. So we're going to see authoritarianism, which is so disproportionate to the threat. And in hindsight, they'll find some way to justify it. And I just don't think that it's likely that the government will allow things to become so anarchic and out of control, because people forget there's off switches to most things. Martial law, stopping the stock market, they can shut it down. They can shut down the banks, okay? They can shut it all down. People might go and riot in the streets, and yes, there's going to be a shortage of manpower, no doubt. That is undeniable. But maybe, just maybe, they're going to utilize some measure of biowarfare, either in the context of war, of World War III, in order to genetically tune something to perhaps the Russian DNA, or maybe Russia will do it in our direction, to the Western European and rest of the world DNA. I don't know. Maybe it's going to be the Chinese that figure out something, because they're a very ethnically homogenous society, as is Russia. So if anybody, could do something that perhaps immunized their own population, it would be either of those two groups. But on the flip side of that, we could effectively create something which was ethnically targeted just for those particular groups. So if we get into the age of biowarfare, then understand that the nuclear option is the nuclear deterrent is not only there to deter nukes, it's also there to deter weapons of mass destruction. be they cybersecurity threats, be they biowarfare threats. If you release a biowarfare agent on us, we will nuke you. Or at least I presume that's how it would work. So it's possible that maybe some clandestine forces who are trying to save face and are trying to find a way out of this predicament, and maybe they're believers in the Malthusian catastrophe idea. The population is too big and we're consuming too much stuff. Maybe they just roll the dice and release something, and that stops the war in its tracks, an armistice, and you have a sort of fresh start for everybody to begin real negotiations on the front. Maybe this is how this ends. But as long as they can maintain a chain of command, people will comply. Officers will go to work. And they will probably have a lot of people signing up. That's another thing you don't want to underestimate is, well, they might have officers who don't show up for work and who quit and have principles and don't want to do what they're forcing them to try to do. Then they'll be able to recruit people. They'll say, hey, you want a badge? You want 3 hots and a cot and a nice new gun and some cool hazmat gear and some just, walk around and LARP around and hold this gun and wield power over people you don't know? You're going to get a lot of people to sign up for that. Okay? So long as they can maintain the chain of command, the authoritarianism will increase by an order of magnitude. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how strong the virus is. You're still going to have this happen because people are going to be given so many different incentives that it's going to be irresistible to become an agent of the state. In fact, it's probably going to be a sought-after occupation when there are fewer other occupations available. So there's probably going to be some holdouts who will persist with not wanting to get any interventions and possibly to their own peril. And this is one thing I've considered is that one of the dangers now, because people are now so skeptical of any sort of intervention pushed by the pharmaceutical industries and the government, because of that now, what if they actually do come out with something that works and people don't take it? And then, of course, that's how it spreads. Of course, we know what they're going to do. They're going to use that as evidence to say, well, we warned you, blah, blah, blah. This is why we need to enforce it and mandate it. We could have saved young, and it's going to come down to the kids. They're going to do it through the kids, right? You could have saved your child if you hadn't done this. So, and people are going to be like, geez, what do I do? Because on the one hand, my skepticism is warranted. Skepticism at this point is warranted, okay? It's not to say that you should be completely one-sided or another, but skepticism is warranted. After 4 or 5 times in the complete disregard of some of the anomalous high death counts in other sectors of society that are apparently unrelated to the jab, then, to the virus, then, that's Freudian slip there. One should be skeptical, which is not to say you throw out the complete science of this sort of thing altogether. You still have to understand that there absolutely is a reason for that field of study, and it works to a certain extent for certain ailments. It's a miracle technology in many ways, and it probably will be again. But, so long as there's confidence in the system, no matter how turbulent it gets, you will see compliance from the authorities. Because everybody's been primed. Everybody knows the drill. Okay? So all I can say is be prepared for anything. Because it's very likely when this war gets hot, one of the first things they are going to do is get a handle on their domestic population. I think before things go nuclear, we'll see a lot of military activity on the home front. We'll see a military buildup at home. And it might not necessarily look like military activity. It could be paramilitary activity. It could be them just making preparations for continuity of government and how they are going to enforce very strict laws which will restrict people's movement and their freedom to do various things. So get ready, guys. Get ready, because I strongly suspect that we've not heard the last of this particular virus, and we certainly have not heard the last of viruses in general. And it's very likely that it's going to relate to what is happening between East and West right now in terms of the prospect of biowarfare. In fact, how it hasn't happened yet, I don't know. It's incredible. It's incredible that it hasn't happened yet, considering how easy it would be for either side to do it. Obviously, there's some immense blowback that you would have to deal with when releasing any biological agent. But desperate times, people get desperate. And we've seen the irrational response and the inconsistent response, most importantly, of the government in the past few years, where the same people that they couldn't be bothered to save before that happened, and the same people they ain't saving now. I mean, look at the situation in Hawaii. Look at all of the disasters. Look at our inner cities. They don't care about the well-being of people. But suddenly they got to stop everything. We got to lock it all down, right? Because we got to save everybody that we never gave two shits about before, and we won't give two shits about afterwards. Something's not right.